From being a helicopter parent to a lawnmower parent to I'm sure there's any number of ideas of what parents shouldn't be right now. But there's a reality in a lot of this that as parents, we feel maybe encouraged or responsible for how our kids are doing and what dangerous things we put before them. But there's some new research out that's kind of pointing to the fact that kids need hard things in their lives. And actually, when they have hard things earlier on in their lives, things that they have to kind of overcome or wrestle with, whether that be the death of a grandparent or a parent or working through other traumatic situations, that the research points to the fact that processing those things at a younger age enables kids to not have to wrestle through insecurities that they might experience later on in life. So should parents encourage problems for their kids? Should we drive our kids to maybe dangerous things or challenging things? This can lead many parents into dark places as they think through what different things are happening in their kids' lives and how should we guide and protect and steward them well. Well, today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy is going to address these topics. She's going to look at how we can encourage our kids, help them build resiliency, but also walk and guide them in ways that are good, healthy, and beautiful, but also how we can prepare them for challenges that they're going to experience later on. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, in a recent Smart Brief article, Rebecca Heiss wrote about the idea of being fearless versus fearless, especially kind of in how we're forming leadership for our kids. She says that according to a 2013 study, those who had expressed many stressful life events were most likely to find their lives meaningful. She also went on to kind of report that those that were under significant stress at the time of the study also rated their lives as more meaningful. The study found that time spent worrying about the future was actually associated with a greater sense of meaning. Now, I know that you're a big proponent of and have studied resiliency and building that into our kids. What do we need to know about resiliency, and how does kind of having this idea of fearing less and kind of that movement guide that?
This is fascinating. I am going to go read this whole article. Fear less versus fearless. Yeah, I'm actually not surprised that young people who experience stress found their lives meaningful, because biblically we know from James chapter 1 and Romans chapter 5 that when we successfully navigate difficult circumstances, we endure, and in that endurance we find character, and in the character we find hope. And that's what allows us to overcome additional barriers and to not, do a U-turn at the beginning of a valley up ahead. And I'm not encouraging us to create valley experiences for our children. Most children will have enough that just naturally pop up. But we don't want to encourage them to give up and sit down and throw a pity party, woe is me. We do want them to face their fears so they discover what they're capable of and what they don't need to be afraid of. And I think that, resiliency, knowing what to be afraid of and what is not a big deal helps us grow up. It helps us believe in our future. And I think that's what this person found, that they have a greater sense of meaning. Oh, I think this is fascinating.
Yeah. What do you think we should kind of do then when something maybe scary or troubled or kind of challenging happens to our kids? Do we call it out and help them understand that they've experienced kind of something that they should have this emotion? Maybe it was stressful. Maybe they didn't recognize that it was kind of scary. You go hiking along a rocky crag or a cliff or something, and you kind of say, that was really stressful, wasn't it? And they didn't maybe even see that it was. Should we call those experiences out to kind of build that into them? Or do we, by doing that, cause them to think that, man, some things that I do should cause me to fear? What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. Well, if we know our children, we'll probably know who was afraid without us saying it. Now, if we're, a room mother on a field trip and we're not sure, then that's a different situation. I think it's okay to ask the question, was your heart thumping, louder? How did you feel? And what's interesting is, again, for us to respect that we parent and teach individual children, what one child finds scary, another found exhilarating. And they might feel the same inside, right? But for a different reason. And, like I don't like roller coasters, and it's okay that I don't like roller coasters. And don't force me to go on one because you think I must be wrong. I know myself, and I know that you don't want me going on that roller coaster. And so it is somewhat fearful for me, but it's what it does to I don't like the feeling of the equilibrium and just being, I just don't like it. I don't like the dark. I don't like the sudden jerks that you can't predict. I don't like it. I'm not going to do it. And that is okay. So I think for us to make sure children know that they're safe with us and that if something is scary, they don't have to repeat it unless there's reason to do so. Like if the whole family likes to hike, right? If that's a value you have, being outside and you love hiking, then of course you want your 7-year-old to enjoy it. Then you hold her hand, when you're in places that she believes are scary and you talk to her, why do you think it's scary? Well, there might be a snake over there. Well, let's go see if there is. And we do some exploring and we read the books and we watch the movies so that they feel a little bit better about it. And the other thing, if I can say it, is that I know it's happened to me sometimes that sometimes I'm fearful or challenged by something because of my stupidity. Like, let's just put it out there. Like, I wasn't paying attention, or I wasn't being obedient, or I wasn't being a good team member, and I made things more difficult for myself. If you're a parent or the older sibling and you know that a kid is struggling and the kid made the struggle happen because of foolishness or arrogance or whatever, then I think we call that to the kid's attention and say, without that attitude you threw, you could have had a really great experience.
So I hear where you're kind of coming at from this, especially the part where you kind of say, if there's a snake over there, we should go and find out. I don't know that would be the thing that I would naturally do. It might be because, I've played Oregon Trail a number of times. I just realized what happens when you get bit by a snake. And the goal for my family is we're going to all make it to the destination together. But I'd like to hear you kind of explain some of this for me, because even as a parent, to put my kids in stressful situations, it feels like not something that I should really do, or maybe even to call it out. I just think that with so much kind of talk and culture and society about mental health and kind of the rise of mental health crises, that we shouldn't really do that to kids, right? I mean, what should we kind of take away from what this person's talking about? And even this idea of building resiliency, because as a parent, it just seems counterintuitive to try to put my son or my daughter in a stressful situation. Should we introduce stress into our kids' lives, or how should we walk through that with them? What are your thoughts on that topic?
Boy, I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think it depends on the emotional resiliency of the children. I think it depends on past experiences they've had and whether or not, one more negative experience would just crush them and cause them to just retreat to their bedroom. I think we can model that we don't turn away from every stressful situation. And why? Because some things are worth doing. Some encounters with people or things are worth it. I wonder if reading, again, and I come back to this idea more than once, but I'm a big believer, could we read biographies and autobiographies of people who have been heroes in a field of study that our kids are interested in? Music, science, sports, history, exploration, spiritual growth, whatever, and show them that overcoming is worth it. Missionary stories. Oh my goodness. Some of our missionaries who overcame tremendous things to witness Jesus to people, and one in entire tribal groups, if you will, to the Lord. I wonder if those kinds of stories would help orient children towards stress.
I love where Dr. Kathy kind of leaves us here. She brings us to this place of reading biographies. And there's a really unique biography that happens in Hebrews 11, where there's this encouragement to look at the faith of the people who have gone before and the way that they carried on, the faith in God to deliver us throughout the whole Old Testament. Rather than reading the whole chapter 11 from Hebrews, I'm going to start reading at verse 24. And this is what's written. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, and about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms and administered justice and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions and quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weaknesses was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were those who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, and the destitute and persecuted, and they were mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in the deserts and mountains. They lived in caves and in holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. I think Dr. Kathy's right. I think our kids don't necessarily need to experience all the brokenness, that parents don't need to put their kids in harm's way so that the kids can develop these strong muscles, that instead maybe our calling is to tell of the people of the faith who have done great things for the Lord and whose faith in God was a gift by the Holy Spirit that was unwavering in times of distress. And I think teaching our kids about that, well, that's a bright light that's going to shine and cut through some of the darkest times that they'll experience today and in their future. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in our daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender, and I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.